want to speak on being heavenly minded. Now, there's an old saying that is not necessarily true. It talks about being so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. You probably all have heard it, but that really is not a spiritual concept. If your mind is really on the things of God, then you're also going to be a whole lot of earthly good. You're going to be a force of change. You're going to be a force of love and hope and freedom and life in the world. But as I speak about this, I'm going to start in a probably rather strange place as we talk about being heavenly minded. Last week, I started with Exodus 23, the first commandment. Today, I want to talk about the second commandment, Exodus 24, which says this: "You shall not make to you any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in the earth beneath." The second commandment is this: make no idols. Now, I know as a kid, very often, and even as an adult, I very often struggled with, is there a lot of difference between the first and the second commandment? Because the first commandment is you shall have no other gods before you, and the second is you shall not make an idol. Now, it's very interesting because an idol could be another god. It could also be the same God. In fact, after Aaron, the priest Aaron, made the golden calf, and they worshipped and bowed down to it and said, "This is your God that brought you out of Egypt," the next day they said, "We're going to celebrate a festival to who? To the Lord." They made a physical representation, and though really an idol is never God, they called it the Lord. And yet that was against the commands that were being delivered to Moses up on the mountain. Something they already knew better than. I want to explain to you something about an idol. An idol is an attempt to reduce God to something we understand. That's the difference between simply serving another God and making an idol. We try to reduce God to something that we understand. And that, my friends, is impossible. As we look at Romans chapter 1, verses 20 and 21, it says this: "Ever since God created the world, his invisible qualities, both his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly seen. They are perceived in the things that God has made, so that those people have no excuse at all. They know God, but they do not give him the honor that belongs to him, nor do they thank him. Instead, their thoughts have become complete nonsense, and their empty minds are filled with darkness." Here is what happens. We know that there is a God who is bigger than us, that is in control. Even those who claim they do not know God, at the core of it, there is a spirit of rebellion that's deep inside that says, "I do not want to have to answer to a higher power. I am the Lord of my own life." That is really what is at the core. And when we make an idol, we try to make God something we understand. We try to form him into something that fits our thought process. And in the process, our thoughts become utter nonsense. We live in a day and an age of reason. We sort of talked about this in Sunday school. By the way, if you're not coming here for Sunday school, you're missing a great time. Didn't we have an awesome discussion this morning? Don't we have an awesome discussion every morning? So make sure you come to that. But you know what? We get into this process where we try to understand everything, and what we can see and taste and feel and touch, what we can understand in our own minds, that is what is the truth. And so God has to fit into the mold that we have made for him. But that's not how it works, folks. God is not of our making, we are of his making. And it's like a pot trying to understand a potter, right? It's like a car trying to understand an engineer. It can't be done. The creator is so much greater than the creation. So in this day and age, we have the teaching of the Big Bang and evolution and all these ways that we got here without God that require an intense amount of faith in science, in what men say. See, it really hasn't changed. We've just tried to make it seem more rational. And as the scripture says, our thoughts become complete nonsense. They become utterly ridiculous. We either try to resolve the existence of God with everything happening without him, or we try to say that God doesn't exist at all. The God that you make, that you understand, that's an idol. The God that you make, that you understand, if you know all about God and what is and is not of him, if he fits and conforms to the life that you want to have, you are not serving the God of the universe, you are serving an idol. Wow, that's kind of harsh, isn't it? Because that kind of suddenly makes that second commandment relevant to all of us. Like before this morning started, a lot of us were like, oh, I'm good. I don't have any idols in my home. No Buddhas, no nothing. I'm good. Now wait, the word of God still applies to me, and maybe I do have an idol of my own making. A reduction of God to something that I understand, to something that fits the laws and the rules that I've put into place. Going on in Jude 10, it says this, yet these people slander whatever they do not understand, and the very things that they do understand by instinct, as irrational animals do, will destroy them. It's funny when you look at an animal trying to figure out what you're doing sometimes. Like they must think we're really odd and we're really strange. We have two dogs at home, Brutus and Bandit, and Bandit, for whatever reason, has chosen me as his favorite.
I'd like to debate that.
Let me rephrase. He follows me everywhere. He licks me all the time, and he sleeps next to me in bed. She's a little jealous. So, I hate to admit it, but as I'm getting older, I'm starting to need things I never used to need before. And one of the things I have now, as of a few weeks ago, sitting next to my bed, is a CPAP machine. To help me breathe right at night, my wife was telling me, you stop breathing for long periods of time. And I was feeling tired and worn out all the time. And we got the CPAP machine, but he looks at me with the strangest look as I'm strapping this thing on my face and turning it on. I bet he's wondering, why is he muzzling himself? That dog's never going to understand what I'm doing. They probably think we're the best, hunters and trappers in the world. It's like, wow, it's like they have food all the time. Man, what did they go out and kill today for me? I mean, they're pretty impressed with my prowess, but they don't really understand how things work in the higher realm of humanity. And as much higher as a dog than we are, we're not anywhere near to the greatness of God. And our greatest understanding of who he is so simplistic. When we enter into glory, we are going to spend an eternity getting to know Jesus. That is the complexity of who he is. That is the awesomeness of our God. He's not just eternal, he is infinite. There is no measure to who he is. Do you understand that? There is no end. As much as you can get to know Jesus, there is infinitely more to know about him. That is how big our God is. So we cannot reduce it to something we understand. Isaiah 55:9 says it this way. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As we've studied the immensity of the universe God has created, we've begun to understand that it is so big, we can't understand it. And that is not the creator, that is the creation. We cannot begin to understand the universe in which we live, the universe that he created, the stars that he put in place, how everything works that he's created. The greatest minds in the world seek to understand things like physics and chemistry, and there's still more mysteries that we don't know than what we do. And God is the one who authored the complexities that science tries to discover. He created that. You know, think about the smartest person you know. Anything that they can seek to know, that they even partially understand, is something God created. God came up with. I hated chemistry in high school. I couldn't get the whole periodic table down. And yet God is the one who put gluons and muons and electrons and protons and neutrons into place and formed atoms and compounds and the complexity of the ideas with which he came up from things that never existed, by the way, just speaks to the greatness of who he is. You can't even think of something that doesn't exist. And you can say, well, yeah, I can think of a dragon, but a dragon's made up of all kinds of things that God created, right? You can't even think of something that doesn't exist from something God made. We can't even imagine outside of God's creation, and yet he's the one who invented it all. That's the greatness, that's the bigness, that's the hugeness, the massiveness of God. As far as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So let's stop trying to conform God to our will. Now, there's a couple ways that people do this. The first one is this: if I can't see it, it doesn't exist, right? And that's what science teaches us. We have to be able to detect it somehow, or it's not really there. If we can't detect it, it's not there. But God is so big. See, we can detect God, by the way. Let me tell you that. All of creation testifies to who he is. And the more we look into creation, if we're honest with ourselves, if we're not trying to find a way to explain him away, we're going to realize that he is there, that all of creation testifies to his presence. But we say, I can't see God, so he doesn't exist. That's the first way we try to simplify God to something we can understand as a fairy tale, as something human beings made up. Psalm 14:1 says this: the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And it really is that simple. It is foolishness to say God doesn't exist. While you are mocked for believing in the Creator, we're also told that nothing blew up. That's literally what we're taught. There was nothing, and then something was somehow there that was of immense mass and energy, infinite mass and energy, and it blew up and became the universe. And then out of random chemical reactions, life formed. And the most complicated coding that has ever existed, genetics, formed eventually you and I. By the way, the human genome is more complicated than any program, any code, anything ever written or created by man. It is so massive that we only understand minutia of what it still means. Most of the genetic code of the human being, for all the advances that we've made, for all the studies that have been done in genetics, most of it, we don't know what it does. And we're told it's ridiculous to believe in God, but oh yeah, you can believe that the universe popped out of nothing and then life formed out of non-life, even though that's impossible. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. It's foolish. It is foolish. And I know, if you've ever seen the way an atheistic movement reacts to someone saying there's a God, you know that there's this open wound that you're touching every time you say that God is there. There's this part of them deep inside that they're burying that says God is there. And they don't want to listen to that voice. The next way we make an idol is this: serving God on our own terms. I cannot serve God on my own terms and say that he is God. Who's in charge if God conforms to what I think he is? I am. If God only does what I think he should do, if God only reacts in the ways that I say he's supposed to react, if God only wants me to do the things I want me to do, then I am God. I am putting myself in charge. We have this saying in the world that is absolute hooey. It's bunk. And it's this. It says, follow your heart. Follow your heart. If you're married and you feel affection towards somebody else, follow your heart. Leave them and go be with them. Follow your heart. If you feel like doing something, even though that something is sinful, it's okay. Because you need to be true to yourself. I heard a story many years ago of a man who was a Christian, but he felt like God had opened this great door of opportunity. He was going to make all this more money. He was running a printing business, but he was going to move to California and get in this job at this company printing pornography. He was so excited, and a year after moving there with his family, they had gotten divorced. Their family had fallen apart because he was looking at the money rather than the morality. He was looking at what he wanted rather than what God wanted. We can't serve God on our own terms. In Judges 21:25, it says this: in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That phrase is used again and again as a criticism of the people of Israel, that they did what was right in their own eyes. And that's what we try to say in this day and age. It's nothing new. For centuries we've been saying, just do what's right for you. That's a lie from the pit of hell. What you think is right for you ain't what's right for you. It'd be like parents saying, okay, kids, just have at it. Do whatever you want to do. You want to touch the stovetop? Oh, go ahead. That's not a problem. That's what's right for you. What kind of parenting would that be? Can you imagine our kids getting enough trouble as it is without us just saying have free reign? And yet that's what we want God to be. Just let me do what I want to do. Let me go where I want to do. Say what I want to say. Be what I want to be without considering your will. We can't do what's right in our own eyes because of this. Proverbs 16:25, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. If you are following your heart, you're following your heart right off of a cliff, my friend. You are going to face destruction by listening to the deceitfully wicked heart that is inside of you. Never forget that we are fallen. We are fallen, and we are drawn to sin just like a moth is drawn to light, and we know how that ends. Finally, I'll say the biggest idol that we face in the church is the idol of materialism. Because we've turned the message of God into our material supply. A lot of the teaching of an idol is about materialism. What would they make the idols out of? They would make them out of solid gold, or they'd layer them with gold and silver and precious jewels. Because at the heart of it, the heart was earthly goods. But we've let materialism come into the teaching of the church. You know, we talk about first world problems, right? Here we live in one of the greatest countries ever known. We live in, even the poor among us live in great wealth compared to other countries, right? Here, poor means you get your food from the government, right? Elsewhere, poor means you starve to death. We live in a blessed day and age, but we have turned the message of the gospel into materialism. I have heard preachers say, if you come to my church, if you just have enough faith, you're going to have a big house, you're going to have a big car, you're going to have all the earthly goods because God desires to bless you. God does desire to bless you, but the worst blessing many of us can receive is all the earthly stuff we could want. That's the worst thing that we could have. You guys all know who Jeff Bezos is, right? Anybody? No? You all ordered something from Amazon before? He's the guy who started that company. Guy has money coming out everywhere. He's got money everywhere, right? He's got enough money that he can spend money on his money. He's rich beyond measure. His wife's filing for divorce because even though he has all this, he also had an affair. Why? Because he was still looking for something. By the way, have you noticed there's all these rich people who aren't throwing up their hands and saying, hey, I've got enough, time to quit? They all keep working for just a little bit more, and they lie and they cheat and they steal and they do people wrong just so they can get a couple extra nickels. Materialism is not the answer, and when we push materialism into the realm of our spirituality, we are failing. We are corrupting the message of the gospel. Jesus didn't die so you could have a nice house or a nice car. If you do, thank him for it. And if you don't, thank him for what you have. He didn't die so that you could have great wealth in this life. This life is just a blip on the radar in comparison to eternity. And you're going to have a mansion over the hilltop anyway. So forget about this. We're not supposed to live for the things of this world, and yet we turn the message of the gospel into God is going to give you physical goods and physical wealth. Ecclesiastes 5:10 says this, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. One of the number one things we run after in this nation today is financial wealth, and it's meaningless. In fact, Jesus said this, he said, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. That is the exact opposite message that the world tells us, right? If you're rich and famous, you have it all. We live in a nation that operates on the system of capitalism. And capitalism is the best system we've been able to come up with. But it's not perfect, right? Because it still falls prey to all of the same wicked desires that people have, of greed and selfishness. 1 Timothy 6:9 says this, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. But let me just step back from materialism just a little bit, because you might be like, well, I'm not all about the wealth. I'm not all about the house. I'm not all about the cars. But are you all about this life? Are you living for the here and now? Are you living for this present day and age? Are you living for the life you can build here? Or are you living for something more? Are you living for his kingdom? Because if you're not, that in itself is materialism. Because materialism means you're just living for this material, physical world. And if your heart is not on things above, you're so earthly that you're no heavenly good. 1 John 2:17 says this, the world and everything in it that people desire is passing away, but those who do the will of God live forever. I like that because he says everything in it. Not just money, not just houses, not just cars. Everything of this world is passing away. So what should we be? What should we be as a people because we have that knowledge? Those who do the will of God live forever. So we're talking about being heavenly minded. Colossians 3:2 tells us to do that. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. Don't listen to the wisdom of this world that says you're so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. Because what happens is we get so earthly minded that we're no good at all. Set your minds on things above, Let me close with 2 Corinthians 4:18, which says this: we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. You want to honor that second commandment, that we're not going to have idols, that it's God who we're going to serve? Take your eyes off the temporary and put them on the eternal. Fix your eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. I like how the author of Hebrews said it. I'm going to fix my eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith. So let me close with this question. Is your eyes on the physical? Is your eyes on the idol? Are your eyes on the idol? Or are your eyes on the eternal? Let's pray. Father, we pray that you would open the eyes of our hearts. Open the eyes of our hearts and let us see truth. Let us look not to the things of this world, not to the things that don't have value, not to the things that are perishing and passing away, but help us to have eyes that are fixed on Jesus. God, we don't want the things of this world to be an idol that distracts us from the living God. So we cast down our idols. We cast down those physical things that have distracted us from the spiritual, those unimportant and temporary things that have caused us to look away from you. And Lord, we make this commitment right now that we will fix our eyes on Jesus, the author, the perfecter of our faith. In Jesus' name.